Hey guys, Professor Bill of Comic Book University and Champions, issue number 24. Let's do the non-glare version. You never think it'll happen to you. And this is the school shooting issue that we're discussing was going to be happening pretty soon. And we actually got this special announcement in the beginning. I love that Zub and whoever's been writing the comic book, particularly Isaac. Isaac's is back. I love that they always do something in the beginning of the comic book, like the one thing with the broom in the beginning, or no, the lamp post, that the lamp that we had in the beginning of one of the issues, that was actually the one that was used to kill Viv Vision. That was cool. It's like, what the heck are we looking at a lamp post for? And all of a sudden, anyway, let's get into the issue itself. This issue is called Trigger Warning. The writer is Jim Zub. The artist is a returning Sean Isaacs. Welcome back. Color artist Marcio Menez and Eric Arcianega. Letterers VC's Clayton Cowles. The cover is by Isaacs and Menez. So yeah, man. Yeah, this is basically a school shooting. Like, it's hard to say exactly what you're supposed to feel about this, but this is the Visions Academy. This is Miles Morales' school, and he's away. He's got a reason why he's not in school right now, because everybody's just picking electives, and his parents allowed him to not have to take electives. So, you know, he gets to not be in school. He's in costume right now, and he's out hanging with the champions, and all of a sudden he gets the notice that your school is, you know, there's actually an active shooter on your school. Now, he just swings off really quick. He doesn't tell anybody what's going on. Viv Vision catches on because, well, she is the internet. Mark Waid established that very clearly back when he was writing the Champions. So I'm reminding everybody in case we'd forgotten. She is the internet. She's a hotspot. She's a hotspot. So a whole bunch of bad things happen, and one of the people who actually winds up getting hurt is Goldballs. He doesn't die. I'm going to give you that. All right, we don't actually lose him. We're done with losing mutants for a little while, apparently, unless you're actually Ed Brisson and you're writing the current extinction agenda right now. That's an entirely different story. But yeah, over here we're keeping mutants alive, at least it seems. So Goldballs makes it, but like 7 people have been hit. It's really bad. So if you harken back to issue number 31 of Amazing Spider-Man, Volume 2, that is, just, what, like a dozen years ago or so, Straczynski was writing this one. We also have a school shooting episode. I think this was the first time that it was ever addressed in the comic books, but by all means, please correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know everything. But when Straczynski tackled that one, he had Peter, it was Peter Parker going after it. Peter Parker was actually already in the school. There was something he could do. He's freaking Spider-Man, so he was able to capture the guy. He was able to save a bunch of lives. He was a flat-out hero. It's the kind of thing that we all wish that we could do, or at least the kind of thing that we all think that, you know, some people think they can do. Even if I didn't have a gun, I think I would still go in there and try and say, yeah. If you were ever in the army, if you were in the military, you'd be a little bit smarter than that. In the meantime, for the rest of us, this was interesting because this comic book, the way that it was presented, simply should not have worked. So allow me to explain why that is. This comic book shouldn't have worked because there are always the 6 basic questions and the 6.5 question, the who, what, when, why, where, and how. Also, the 6.5 is how much. Doesn't really fit in with the other ones, does it? So, yeah, I former university professor teaching English as a foreign language, so I'm very attentive to those 6 questions, and I know how to say them in multiple languages. So those questions, some of those questions at least, have to be answered as a comic book goes on. And when you think about it, the crux of understanding any story is coming to the conclusion of what the answer is to all of those 6 main questions. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. Sometimes how much. But story progression is when one of those gets answered, either partially or wholly. And the story ends when all 6 of those, 6.5 possibly, are answered. In this issue, nothing is answered. Nothing. Nothing is answered. This story should not have worked. Why did it? I think that with any tragedy, many of us have, especially if you're American and you lived during the time of 9/11, America had this very, very unique feeling of being impregnable. Like we couldn't be touched. Nobody could harm us, you know? It was a very strange thing to me because before I actually joined the Army, I joined in 1983. I'm, American, just living in Canada. I think most of you guys know by now. I joined in 1993. And I actually joined in January of 1993. So the beginning of 1993, I was actually still in high school when I joined. And 3 years before that was everybody coming home from, Operation Desert Storm. Now, Desert Storm is the first Iraq war. There was actually Desert Shield and then Desert Storm itself. And for the most part, we didn't really lose anybody. The war was over in a number of hours. It wasn't measured in days that this attack was over. We call it a war. It was hardly that. It was more like a turkey shoot. They actually welcomed us as we expected they would. We would make miscalculations later on in places like Somalia. Most places expected us and accepted us, but Somalia was a slightly different story. We're not there. Right now, we came back and we actually did something that we usually don't do. We had a parade. Yeah, I remembered streets being shut down. I was still in, I just finished, I think, freshman year of high school. So yeah, something to that effect. And I remember we were celebrating. Fort Monmouth was right down the road from where I lived at the time. I could ride my bike there, and I just remember hearing all the sirens and everything, and I rode down there really quick. And I was surprised to see that we're actually having a parade. We didn't really have parades for the most part for Vietnam. It's expected. Grenada, we didn't do much. And a bunch of our other military operations, we didn't. The last time we really celebrated a win was Korea. And even then, that's obviously known as the Forgotten War. Before that was World War II. So there wasn't really much for us to celebrate since those times. So I was very shocked to see that we celebrated that. Come to find out later is because George Bush Sr. was looking for re-election and he thought that war was going to help him, and somehow it didn't. It usually does. Regardless, it's the idea that we were celebratory of something. Later on, we would go on to be in other engagements, but I grew up in a time when we weren't necessarily in a constant state of war. That's changed since 9/11. There are people, there are Americans born today, people in the world, who don't know what it's like for America to not be occupying another country or being invading, and invading another country, whatever. No actual declaration of war necessary any longer. It's a strange feeling for me. It's a strange feeling for a lot of people. It's the norm for many younger people. But 9/11 really was tragic, and it did allow for a lot of people to... The Patriot Act could have never been passed in any other time in American history. Any other time. That could never have happened. But here we are. And one of those things is because we did feel as this sense of loss. Why does this relate to this comic book? Because this comic book was about a tragedy. This comic book was about that sense of loss. You could say it's only 3,000 people. Yeah, in fact, it was actually less than 3,000 people that were lost, who were lost in 9/11. But it was a time that America came together. It was a time when racism actually dropped to an all-time low. It's never been that low in the history of... Yeah, it was ridiculously low. It was surprising. Eventually it would come back and we would have many reasons for it. I didn't say there were good reasons, but it was a time of understanding. It was a time of peace. It was a time of acceptance. All of that I saw in here. There was a prayer session held, and characters who I know from reading them wouldn't be interested in going to a prayer session, but all of a sudden Goldball's aunt says, will you pray with me? It's like, oh, well, and then, please. And these people weren't praying for anyone except, not even praying for Goldballs. It seemed to me like they were praying specifically for the auntie because she needed it. And times like this is a time when we all need a healing, and we're willing to do things. We're willing to sacrifice of ourselves in order to help others. And that's a rare kind of thing. And it's a shame that it takes some kind of a tragedy for that to happen. But at the end of the day, things don't actually get better, specifically for school shootings, right? Thoughts and prayers, huh? So this is not meant to be a political conversation at all. This is meant to be, look at what happened in this comic book. Look at the reality of this tragedy. This could have been anywhere. This could have been Sandy Hook. This could have been Virginia Tech. This could have been Columbine. All of us, I think, can, for the most part, rattle off the names of all these schools that this happened in, and it's a damned shame. But what worked with this that I feel didn't work at all with Straczynski's, because Straczynski's was more of, oh man, something bad happened, I'm going to kick some booty. I think a lot of us remember, and a lot of us are really upset with, a similar story like, oh, Dr. Doom shouldn't have cried. At the time, Dr. Doom freaking cried. Afterwards, let it go. But it's not about Dr. Doom. At the time, I don't think people really understand that. So with Straczynski's story, it was about, I'm going to get you back. That was more of a Frank Miller, when he was trying to make that Batman comic book, and DC was like, this is not happening. This is not Batman. Frank Miller was determined to write that comic book anyway. He was a very angry, bitter. He became very racist. I don't know if he still holds those feelings anymore, but he clearly became very, very racist, and he was angry, and he fought back in a way that wasn't physically violent. It could have potentially incited to violence, whatever it is, what it is. You can also just say, oh, it's just a comic book. It's media, and all of these things can affect us. Whether you call it irresponsible or not, that's not the point. He reacted one way. The guys at Marvel reacted another way. Everybody's going to react in their own way. That's the important part. Some will speak to you, some won't. Depends on who you are and what you're looking at the time. With Straczynski's issue, his comic book, Amazing Spider-Man Volume 2, number 31, it was more of a, I'm going to get something done. I'm going to make something happen right now. Zub's approach to this, Isaac's approach to this, because he has just as much to do with this as Zub does. It was different. This was different. This was more of a, nothing's going to be answered. Why? Because nothing ever gets answered when these kinds of things happen. Why did the shooter do that? Look, we can look afterwards and say, oh yeah, whatever, but we don't get a name of the shooter. We don't get a motive. We don't get anything, because in real life, it's all speculation. All of it, everything that's going to be said afterwards. He did it because of this. Even if the shooter writes a note afterwards, this is why I did it. That's why you say you did it. That's why you say that you did it. But you're not a psychologist. How many of us can really cure ourselves of psychoses? So if we could, there would be no such thing as PTSD. So I challenge you. Just because somebody writes something. And there wasn't even a note mentioned here. There didn't have to be. I love that Zub reminded us that Riri's actually been through things like this on a more direct, personal note. But this was a really good comic in the idea that the only way that you could do the complete and total neglect of who, what, when, why, where is in this kind of an environment where there is a tragedy, a universal tragedy that everybody can come together for. This was brilliant, and I enjoyed this immensely. Is this going to go down as, one of those great comics of all time? Maybe. maybe not. Maybe it'll just be forgotten. But it probably shouldn't be. I'm going to leave it at that. Professor Bill, Comic Book University. Class dismissed.